Hi there. Welcome back to Tuesday's Tips. I'm Greg Kaiser, and we've been diving into Lightroom here over the past few months. Talked about global edits. We're now getting into the local edits, and we're talking about masks mainly at this point. And one of the masks that I want to talk about is one of the ones that I use probably the most, or at least the most regularly in my edits. And it's one of the older masks that Lightroom has used, and it's called the linear gradient. And for those of you that are used to using filters on your cameras, especially those that are landscape photographers, you're probably aware of the graduated neutral density filter, and that's the one that's usually like a 4x6 flat piece of material. The top half is darker while the bottom half is clear, and then you can kind of adjust where that line is in your frame to go with the horizon. And the idea is to darken the sky in relation to the ground. I have used those longer than I've really been editing pictures, honestly. When I first started in photography, I didn't understand editing at all. Photoshop confused me. So I tried to get everything right in camera, and I started using grad filters very early on to help with the overall exposure of the picture. I still use those to this day, but I have taken what I've learned from that, and that has directed a lot of how I do my image editing now. And I use the linear gradient within Lightroom to accomplish pretty much those same types of goals. And it's to work with the exposure, it's to help direct the eyes. And always remember, when we're talking about photography, the human eye sees pretty much uniformly the same way. We go towards areas of the brightest light, so the brighter areas of the scenes, what our eyes go to first. Then we go to areas of contrast. Then we go to areas of saturation. The linear gradient is a way of controlling the brightness of the scene by keeping the eyes focused more into the middle of that frame. It's also a way of selecting certain areas that we want to deal with. And I'm going to go in, we're going to talk about just one picture today. And it's one that I've picked because it's got several different qualities that I think are going to work out really well for this. So we're going to go ahead and jump on in, and should be seeing Lightroom right now. And this is going to be the end result photo that we're going to be going for. And it's one that I shot a while ago. And just for reference, this is what the raw image started out as. Now, I actually did use grad filters in this. If I'm not mistaken, I used a 2 and a 3 stop soft edge. So I had close to 5 stops worth of correction in the sky just to get the shadow detail in this car. Now, that's important because I always preach to make sure that you are shooting for the way you intend to edit. I knew how I wanted this picture to look when I was shooting it, and part of that was I needed detail down here in the shadow. I wanted lots of saturation in the color here, but I also wanted to keep the detail in the sky. I thought the sky looked really dramatic. So by using the grad filters, I was able to keep the dynamic range where I needed it for a single picture. This is not a HDR, high dynamic range image. It's a single capture, and it captured everything that I needed as far as material. This is what I ended up with. We've got the saturation here in the car, we've got the drama in the sky, lots of contrast, lots of detail. You can't see the detail down here in the shadows, but it is there, and there are subtleties in here that I like, and I wanted to make sure that we kept those. A large part of what I did with this image was due to linear gradients within Lightroom. And what I've done, I have, well, before I go into that, let's go ahead and just look at the masks that I've done. This is what I have done throughout the image. I selected the car, which was the subject. I did a vignette, which kind of closed it in, and that's another filter that we're going to, or another mask that we're going to talk about later on. I did a lower boundary. We're going to talk about this today. I did an upper boundary. We're going to talk about that today. I actually worked the sky, and I'm going to do it a little bit different here for the demonstration. We did basically a focal point on that tail light, which is another radial gradient. We'll get into that another time. I did some dodging and burning with luminosity masks, which I've actually talked about already. That's been a video a while back, but check out my history videos if you want to see how to do the dodging and burning in the easy way. A little bit of a grass shadow over here I worked, and then I changed the saturation in the grass. This is another one we're going to talk about. And then I just did a little bit of emphasis there on that tail light. So those are the masks that I ended up doing on this image. So what I want to do here is I've done a virtual copy, and I've got the same masks on here with the exception of the ones that were based on that linear gradient. So we're going to kind of recreate those, and I'm going to show you how that works. And one of the things that I really like with the linear gradient, and I've picked this up more recently, and this photo was shot probably two and a half years ago, but I have since fine-tuned how I do skies, and we talked about doing the sky with Select Sky, and that's a real quick and easy, fast way to do it, but it tends to get a little bit too much down here at the horizon. So what I have started doing is a combination of masks, and I'm going to show you how that works. We're going to essentially select the sky, but we are going to do it in a different way. We're going to create new mask. We're going to go down here to linear gradient, and we're going to pick a point about midway, and the point that we're picking right now is essentially going to be where that division is going to take place. I want the full effect of what I'm getting ready to do up here, and I'm going to want it to feather as we get closer to the horizon. So somewhere right around in here, I'm going to left click, and I'm going to drag down. And as you notice, this thing is going to get all wonky going every which way. You can do that and get a custom horizon line that fits your picture, or you can simply press Shift on your keyboard, and it's going to lock it in either horizontal or vertical depending on which way you're going. So I'm continuing to drag down, and you see where I'm starting to get really close to the horizon. And you can tell from this green, the full effect is up here. There's a feather between this line, and then another feather between these two lines, and then there is no effect down here. So what I've essentially done is I have feathered this sky effect from the horizon up to the sky. So it's very gradual, which makes this transition much more natural looking. And remember, I brought this down with the Shift key, but if you'll notice where my horizons are based on distances, this one is lower, this one is higher. So this would be a good opportunity to take this mask and we're going to tilt it. So that brings a little bit more of this feather here and keeps the feather here. So I've just worked with what my horizon line was. So now I'm happy with the horizon, but we've got a problem now because anything that I do to the sky is going to affect this car. I don't want that to happen. So you can go up here and you can do subtract, and we've been doing subtract brush before, but this time I want to subtract subject. Let's see if it pulls the car out. It's detecting, it's trying to find that big massive rusting car in the middle of the frame, and looky there. It actually works really well. Now you'll notice here on this chrome trim that there is still that mask that's applied to it. That's okay because this chrome trim is reflecting the sky. So I'm okay with anything I do to the sky affecting this chrome trim within reason. So we have essentially selected the sky here, and we have got the horizon line and it keeps wanting to go to the wrong overlay here. I apologize for that. It's very hard to talk through this stuff. I can do it very fluidly when we're actually looking through it, but let's see. All right, so here we go. We've got the mask that we want. We have identified the sky. Now remember, what I wanted was detail in the sky. So a lot of people will just go ahead and drop the exposure and call it a day. And that's essentially what those grad filters did that I had on the lens at the time. Remember, I had almost 5 stops, and I'm dropping it down about another half a stop, about right there. But what I want more than exposure dropping at this point is I want contrast. And again, did not have this particular item available to me before because this was not a feature available in masks, and that's your tone curve. Since I did this one originally, and what I ended up doing was working the whites and the blacks, I was able to bring the white point up a little bit. I was able to bring the black point down a little bit and probably added a little bit of contrast. And that's okay, and it works, and as we see here, that does fine. But there is a more precise way of doing it. So we're going to double click all those, bring those back. All I've got is the half stop reduction in exposure. We're going to come down to the tone curve. We're going to hit the color picker here. I want to go to the brighter area here in the clouds, and you see where that is over on that upper right part of the graph. We're going to take that and we're going to bring that up just a little bit, brighten that up. It's going to brighten the whole sky up, but that's okay because we're in curves. And I'm going to go to over here in one of the darker areas, not the darkest, but we're still above midtone. You can see where the little eyelet is on the graph to the right. We're above midtone, and I'm going to bring this down. So I'm creating a curve, and we just kind of suit to taste, and then go up here to even darker portion, and you see where the pick is on that line. It's now to the lower left, and we're starting to get to the bottom edge of the pixels that are represented within luminosity. You can see from the subdued graph in the back. So we're going to pull this down just a little bit. There we go. All right. So I've increased the drama to the sky, but as we've talked about before, as you increase contrast into a scene, color changes. Usually that means saturation. So that's why we have a refined saturation slider down here. It's another really great addition. And what it does is it fine-tunes the saturation that was affected by what we just did. And I'm going to remove all the saturation out, so it is just a luminosity adjustment. We're not adjusting the color. And if we did not do that, you see how blue that sky is. I could do that with a little bit of warmth added into the sky, but for this purpose, it's easier just to go ahead and refine the saturation by pulling all the affected saturation out. We're back to the original color levels. We've just added contrast. So if we take this eyeball here, and you see where we have just really deepened that sky. Take the effect away, it's kind of flat, we bring the effect in, and that's just that tone curve. So that was much more effective than the way that I did it originally. And I'm also looking at the sky, and to me it's still a little on the cool side. So let's see what it looks like warmed up a little bit, just to go with some of the rust tones. Okay, bring it back to about here. So what we've done, we've taken some of the blue tone out of the sky. It's still there, but it's not as prevalent. We might want to adjust the tint just a little bit to the right, give it a little bit of magenta, because magenta goes hand in hand with drama usually. And somewhere right about in there. And usually what I'll do is I'll go a little too far and then I'll come back. It's a subtle change, and you may not see the nuances of this on your screen. If you're on a color balance monitor and you're looking at it in real time, it does make a lot of difference. So I'm really happy with how the sky is looking, and we can go over here on the entire mask instead of just the tone curve or just the exposure. Let's take the whole mask and undo the eyeball. So with those few changes, we have made that kind of difference. Now, as we talked about last week, there's a couple of other things that we can do. I don't think it's suitable for this image, but I want to show you. This little letterbox here, we can go in here and we can start to retone the sky this way. And just left click and you can go all through these different colors and you can see if something makes more sense to you. A real colorful sky here is not going to be what I'm after. So I'd stay down on the lower end, which is the lower saturation. Something like that could potentially work, but it's very close to what we started out with. That's the current color. That's the original color. I'm going to click back to the original color because I do like that slight bit of coolness to it. So that's one thing that we can do. We're going to X out of there. We can also go to this hue slider, and this is going to be like really, really heavy-handed. And it's not something I necessarily recommend with skies, but it is something that's available. Double click there. One that I prefer for skies is down here again in the tone curve. Now we can go into the different colors like red, and somewhere up here we can bring more red in. If we're looking at a sunrise, sunset type thing, you can start to really, really get those colors to pop. If you're trying to color grade and you want more of a cyan look, we can pull that down a little bit, and you see how it brought that cyan back in, which works really well with the rust, but it de-emphasizes the color of the car. So I don't like that. The next one is green. The opposite color is magenta. So another way to add magenta in is to drop this tone curve down into the magenta, and that's just throwing more magenta into the sky. And we can always make it more green, and if we go all the way up here, eventually it's going to be a matter of we don't know when to stop mowing because the grass and the sky are green. Very unnatural, so we're not going to do that. We can also do the blue channel, and again, if you come down, it's the opposite of blue, and it goes into more of a yellow, a warmer tone. So you might like something more like that. It makes the clouds pop a little bit more. And this is the beauty of things. Right here at the horizon, we still have the original colors. We're very close to it. This is feathered. So we don't see this harsh change like when you do select sky. And that's why I prefer this method over the just select sky. I do the grad filter, and then I can intersect it with select sky, or I can subtract subject depending on what I'm dealing with. But you get this gradual transition, and it is more believable, it's more natural, and it's more what I see in my edits. So keep that in mind. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to click out of this because I'm happy with what the sky looks like right now. And I'd go ahead and title that. But we're not done with the sky yet, because one of the things that I always really like to do in my edits is I like to close in an image. And what that means is I like to make the center part, or my subject, really the brightest thing in the scene. And we've got a lot of brightness going on in the clouds up here. And it's getting close to this edge, and I don't want this fin to point the eyes up here and then the eyes leave at the top. So I'm going to create a new mask. Big surprise, linear gradient. And we're going to start this one outside of the frame. Now, an important thing to remember with these filters and these masks is that you don't have to start within the picture. You can actually start outside. And for this one, I'm going to press Shift on the keyboard, left click on the mouse, and I'm going to drag down. And what we are seeing happening at this point is the full effect of this mask is outside of the frame. Everything we are seeing here is just feather. Nothing is happening here. Everything is happening out of the frame, and what we see here is just going to be feather. Now we're getting a little bit of feather on the tip of the fin here, so we can deal with that. It's not going to make a huge difference. Or we can come up here, subtract subject, or if we hover over here and do Alt Option on a Mac and do intersect, we can intersect it with select sky. So it's going to remove the subject because the subject is not sky. So that's another way of doing it. Before I just subtracted the subject. This way I'm intersecting with sky, so it's like a Venn diagram. Everything that is within this mask here and includes just the select sky. That's what's included in this mask now. So that's a real handy thing to do. And it just, again, some of these AI masks do make life a lot simpler, and just a matter of how you choose to use them. And it can be a combination. It can be whatever you prefer. A lot of times I'll do intersect. A lot of times I'll do subtract. A lot of times I'll do add. It just whatever works for that situation. But here we're going to drop the exposure again, and we're just closing this in, and we're adding to that drama, and we're making more or less a natural vignette. We're used to seeing things go dark at the edges, just the way photography has always been. And I incorporate that in my pictures. Now I'll remove it in the lens correction. I'll take any vignetting from the lens and I'll remove it, because I will add it artistically, usually through radials, through linears, and through an actual add vignette. But I have total control over how that vignette looks. And we have now darkened this sky, and I'll usually call that my upper boundary. I've also got a vignette added with a radial filter that darkens everything also. So all these masks work in unison together. I never rely on just one mask to do all the heavy lifting. I will take a lot of different masks. I will stack the linear gradients like I did for the sky here, so I have very little effect here. It builds up, builds up, builds up, and then builds up even more as we go up to the top. That is how I like to do my edits. I do multiple masks on top of each other that complement each other, not trying to do everything in just one mask. And I'm okay with doing a mask in one slider. That is not a problem for me. So we've gotten the sky to a really, really good point now. It's closed in, the attention is here on the car. But we've got some things going on here. There's just a lot of openness here in the grass that I want to close in. Part of what I want to do is take some of this green out, because I want the main saturation to be here on the car. The eyes go to the brightest parts of the scene. We've got this that's white, we've got this chrome that's bright, we've got lighter colors here. This doesn't really compete overly much with all the different white we've got here. We've got the white wall here. When it comes to saturation, the sky is more muted than the car. We've got a lot more saturation going on in the car, but unfortunately we have a lot of saturation in the grass. So in my eyes, the grass is now competing for attention from the car. So we need to work on that. We've got the contrast here in the car, so that's good. We've got brightness, we've got contrast, but I need to work on this saturation. So we're going to create a new mask, and we're going to do, I bet you already guessed this one, you're right, a linear gradient. And I'm going to do a couple of different ones here. And this one I want to deal with the saturation on the grass. So I'm going to come up here kind of close to where I want that horizon to be. Left click, and I'm going to bring this up. I don't need to use the shift key because I actually do want it at a slight angle. I want to try to cover where that is, and that looks good to me. We are covering this line here just below it, and we're going out here. So I can reduce the saturation of the grass, but that's going to cause a problem. We're now affecting the car. Well, I can't intersect with the sky because there is no sky down here to intersect with. I can do it with a color and do the grass with the color, but there's going to be enough green here in the car that may be a problem. So we're just simply going to subtract select subject. I get a lot more use out of select subject when it comes to fine-tuning a mask than I do from using the select subject as my mask in the first place. So with the grass, I want to do a couple of things. Number one, because grass is a high frequency texture, meaning there's lots of changes and shifts and they aren't large scale, we're going to add texture. That just adds a little sharpness to the grass. So something like that. We've added contrast, we're adding saturation. So we're going to come up here under the color, and we're going to take the saturation slider, and we are going to pull it down. Not much. I mean, there's no need to go black and white with this. But I do want to minimize the green of the grass. So something probably about there, -22. And it may even be a tad on the warm side. So let's cool it. Bring that temperature slider over to the left and cool it. Now to me, and let's do the eyeball, look at the grass, look at the sky. Without the mask, you see how the grass is really punchy and it doesn't fit the mood. The lighting does not say that the grass should be that saturated. So by reducing that saturation, cooling it a little bit, now we have this feeling of shadow. We have this feeling that it is under this sky. The car is still very saturated. It still pulls the attention. So just those couple of things with this grass mask made a lot of difference. And I'd go ahead and do this, probably grass texture sat would be what I'd title it. But we still have that closed in need, or that need for closing the picture in. So we're going to create a new mask, a linear gradient. I know, I'm getting redundant at this point. We're going to do shift, because I want this one to be relatively straight. We're starting outside of the frame. And we're just going to kind of come up until we get about right there. So this is all feather because I want it to be gradual. And we can just drop the exposure, which is one way of doing this. And in some situations it works really well. This is not one because at almost a stop of light loss here, this is just getting very flat. So we're going to double click that, and instead I'm just going to pull the black tones down. So I'm going to kind of crush the blacks down here, which leaves the highlights. And that's looking a little bit better. It's more subtle. And we can always bring the white point up, which is going to increase the contrast. And then let's come down here to the tone curve and let's pull the dark shadows down so we get more going on here. There we go. All right. And we can even come up here. Let's get the color picker for this because I want to pick something right about there. And I want to pull that tone up. So something about like that. And we can do the eyeball. And you see how opened up that is and how when we don't have that closure, the eyes almost want to drop out of the frame to the bottom. There's nothing there to stop them. But if we put in this little bit of darkness down here at the bottom, the eyes are going to see this. They're going to come down. They're going to look at the texture in the grass that we just added. All of this tells the story, but because it is so dark down here at the bottom, the eyes don't want to leave. So they stay here and they stay in this cyclical pattern looking at the car. And what we have essentially done with the use of now 4 linear gradients, we have closed this picture in. We have adjusted the sky to exactly how we want. We have added texture to the grass. We have closed in the bottom of the frame and the top of the frame, along with a radial vignette. I don't want to take anything away from that. That's a big one as well. We can do the eyeball here. And you see how that just really closes it in, and it makes it feel more ominous. That's where these local masks really come into play. They dictate where the eyes go, and they set an emotion. They set a mood for the picture. So that's where we really need to look at image editing. It's not being big and grand and changing things in a picture. We don't want to just wholesale change things in the image. We want to take a solid image and we want to create our vision. This was the raw image. That's what the final image is. And with the different techniques that I use today that weren't available before, this is what I ended up with. And I went a little heavier handed on the closing in this time versus last time. Every edit is going to be different. Even if it's the same picture, one that you loved before, every time you do this, you will do it slightly different because you're going to react to it in a different way. I wanted it to be more ominous this time, apparently, and that's okay. Does that mean that this original edit is any less appealing? No, I still like this one. It works just the same. This one just has a slightly different mood to it. And it's just all in little subtle changes. Those were only 4 masks that I didn't change anything else. So just keep that in mind. Let's see, let's go on back here. All right, that pretty much wraps it up, and this probably went a little longer than I wanted it to, but the linear gradient is one that I use a lot. In fact, it took me about an hour to find the picture that I wanted to showcase to show you about the linear gradient, because I use it on everything, and I use it in combination with things like select subject, select sky, select object. All those different things work with the linear gradient. And just remember that add, subtract, or if you hit Alt or Option on a Mac, you've got the intersect. And then don't forget that you've got all these tools within that neutral density gradient filter that I talked about at the beginning, the actual physical one that fits on the lens. That only reduces exposure. In Lightroom, I can mimic what that filter does through a mask and limit exposure, but I can also change contrast, change color. I can fine-tune so much with this filter within Lightroom. And if you ever stop and think, or you hear from somebody saying you need a filter on your camera, I think the video just paused there, so I'm going to say that again because this is important. If you ever hear somebody that claims to know what they're talking about in photography and they say that you don't need a physical filter on your camera because you can do it in post, they are not telling you the whole story. Yeah, you can do a lot of this stuff in post. You cannot mimic a polarizer in post. That's one you really do have to have physically. But something like a grad filter, you can mimic it in post. But as you've seen here, I had 2 grad filters stacked on top of each other for this to get almost 5 stops of light reduction in the sky to give me the foundation to where I can come in and knock another half a stop off, add contrast, change the color tones, without having to blend multiple frames. So keep that in mind. These masks can be used in coordination with physical filters out in the field. The idea is to get an image as close to perfect as you can in the field and then tweak it in post to get an astounding image. That's the biggest takeaway I want you to get from anything I say dealing with image editing. It's not a fix-all. It's not something to mask a mistake. It's something to enhance something that is already very well constructed and crafted. So use all the tools that are at your disposal, whether it be the camera choice, whether it be the lens choice, whether it be filters, whether it be image editing, whether it be how you work the masks and the local edits. All of these things are available to you, and there's no limit on what you can do to use to get the final image. So don't go sell all your filters because, hey, I can now do it in Lightroom and it's included in my subscription. You still need those filters, and I still use my grad filters a lot just to get to that point where I can get a single image into an editor and get it very close to what I want and then just fine tune it. So thank you for joining me. I hope you're enjoying this series. If there's any specific questions that you've got that I haven't answered, that you'd like to see me answer, leave a comment, drop me an email, whatever. I'm happy to help. If you'd like to delve further into this and would like a little bit of one-on-one time talking about Lightroom, talking about editing, I'm happy to do that through a mentorship. We can do that in person. We can do that online. However works best for you. I'll leave a link to my mentorship program down in the description. It's a great way of getting better quicker, and I'm not going to teach you to edit like me. I will show real world examples of how I edit, obviously, but I want you to edit like you want to edit, and I want to know what you want out of a photo, and I will help you achieve that. So let me know, and I'm happy to do that. And other than that, we will get back to this next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. There's a couple more masks that I want to get into, and we may talk about something a little bit unrelated just to get away from the image editing for a little while. So next week's kind of up in the air, but we'll be back and we'll talk about something. So until then, I wish everybody happy shooting and happy editing. And until next time, bye now.